Okay, let's get into this. You know that classic Egyptian symbol, the Ankh? That loop sitting on top of a cross shape, often called the key of life.
Instantly recognizable, yeah.
So here's the thing. What if that symbol, that whole idea, actually connects with ancient Indian philosophy, specifically Sanatana Dharma?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Could these incredibly influential ancient traditions, could they somehow share a common ground in how they understood life, death, divinity, all of that?
Exactly. It feels like a bit of a mystery. And that's what we're trying to, unpack in this deep dive.
Right. And the idea itself that there could be these echoes across such different cultures and times, that's really fascinating.
Totally.
So we're going to explore the symbolism of the Ankh and then look at key ideas in Sanatana Dharma, using this article, Sanatana Dharma and Ankh of Egypt, connecting the dots as our guide.
Our mission, basically, is to see what parallels pop up, what interesting insights we can pull out.
Yeah, let's see what connections emerge.
And for you listening, if you're someone who's curious about those fundamental ideas, those maybe hidden links between cultures and spiritual paths, well, this should be right up your alley.
We're aiming for a solid exploration, getting into the details, but not getting totally bogged down.
Right.
Hopefully surfacing some stuff that makes you go, huh, interesting.
Definitely. Should be some aha moments.
So, where do we start? The Ankh itself.
Makes sense. Let's start there. Visually, it's quite distinct, isn't it? You've got the loop. Sometimes it looks like an oval, sometimes more like a teardrop.
Right.
And that sits on a horizontal bar with a vertical stem below it. Simple, but powerful. And in Egypt, it was way more than just a design.
Oh, absolutely. It carried huge symbolic weight, not just like living a long time, but that deeper spiritual energy, the life force.
Prana, perhaps, in other terms?
Potentially, yeah. And it symbolized that bridge, between the physical world we see and the divine, the spiritual realm.
And you see all the time in Egyptian art, right? Gods holding it, pharaohs receiving it. Yeah, signifying their connection to eternal life, their divine authority. It was a big deal.
And it wasn't just lofty spiritual stuff either. It was also tied to things like fertility, the life-giving Nile River.
That makes sense. Water, life.
And even the balance between masculine and feminine energies, all wrapped up in that one symbol.
Okay, so keep that image, that complex meaning of the Ankh, in your head. Now let's shift focus a bit to Sanatana Dharma.
Right, because the article we're using really pushes this idea. If you look at the Ankh through the lens of this ancient Indian tradition, you start seeing some, surprising overlaps.
In the symbols themselves and the philosophy behind them.
Both, yeah. The article floats two main possibilities. One is maybe shared cultural influence, actual contact and exchange of ideas between ancient Egypt and India.
Okay, like through trade or something.
Exactly. Or maybe it's about universal archetypes, fundamental human ideas about life and the cosmos that just naturally find similar expressions in different places.
Interesting. So what's the first big connection point the article makes?
It jumps right into a visual comparison. The loop at the top of the Ankh and the sacred Om symbol from Sanatana Dharma.
Oh, okay. I can kind of see that. The curve.
Exactly. If you know the Om symbol, that visual resonance is pretty striking.
And Om is huge in Sanatana Dharma, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. It's considered the sound of ultimate reality, of Brahman. It represents consciousness itself, the eternal nature of everything.
Wow. So the article is saying the Ankh's loop representing life or eternity and Om representing, everything. There's a parallel there.
That's the argument, that both symbols, in their own contexts, point to the essence of life, the eternal cycle of birth and death, and that connection between the physical world and the spiritual.
Okay, that's a strong starting point. What's next?
The theme of life and fertility comes up.
Right, you mentioned the Ankh was linked to fertility in Egypt.
Yeah, and in Hinduism, you have the powerful symbolism of Shiva and Shakti, the divine masculine and feminine energies combining. Their union is what drives creation.
Okay.
So the article draws a parallel here, too. It suggests the Ankh itself. Maybe the vertical stem as masculine, the loop as feminine, could represent that same kind of union.
Like the linga yoni symbols you sometimes see.
Precisely that analogy is made. It's suggesting the Ankh embodies that same creative, life-generating principle through the merging of opposites.
That's pretty direct. And what about the idea of eternal life? That seems central to the Ankh.
Definitely. The Egyptians had a huge focus on the afterlife, on life continuing beyond death, and the Ankh was the symbol for that continuity.
And how does that compare to Sanatana Dharma? It's not quite the same idea of an afterlife, is it?
Not exactly the same, no. You have the concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Life continues, but in a cyclical way.
Driven by karma.
Right.
Yeah.
And the ultimate goal isn't just to keep going through the cycle, but moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely.
So different frameworks, but
But a shared emphasis, yeah.
yeah.
That life, in some fundamental way, doesn't just end with the physical body.
Okay. That makes sense. The article also mentioned rituals.
It did. Pointing out how the Ankh was used in Egyptian rituals, often depicted as being offered or bestowed, literally giving life or energy.
Okay, like a divine transfer.
Yeah. And the parallel drawn is to the use of symbols in Hindu rituals. Think about the kalash, the sacred pot, or intricate mandalas.
Which are used to focus or channel divine energy, right?
Exactly. And here's a really specific comparison the article makes. Maybe the loop of the Ankh, that central enclosed shape, is functioning like the bindu in the Hindu yantra.
The bindu, that's the central point, the focus.
The focal point of spiritual energy, yeah. So could the Ankh's loop have served a similar purpose in Egyptian ritual contexts? It's a compelling thought.
It really is. So how might these ideas have traveled or co-emerged?
Well, the article stresses that these ancient civilizations weren't totally isolated. There were significant trade and cultural exchange networks back then.
Right, we forget how connected the ancient world could be.
Think about the Indus Valley civilization. It was around at the same time as Old Kingdom Egypt, roughly. And it has links to early Vedic traditions.
And geographically.
Not immediate neighbors, but connected through intermediaries like Mesopotamia. And crucially, there were maritime trade routes. Ships sailing between the Nile region, Mesopotamia, and the Indian subcontinent.
So ideas could definitely spread along with goods.
It's certainly plausible. Symbols, stories, philosophical concepts, they can travel.
And the article gets even more specific about the Ankh's form, doesn't it? Something about a knot.
Yes, this is fascinating. Some scholars suggest the Ankh might have originally represented a knot made of cloth or maybe reeds.
A knot. Okay.
And here's the linguistic kicker. The Sanskrit word for knot is pasha.
Whoa! Pasha. Like similar sounding, but no, wait, just the meaning, a knot.
The meaning is the key connection here. And it gets better. Early versions of the Ankh look quite similar to another Egyptian symbol called the teat.
The T.
Also known as the knot of Isis. And guess what it symbolized?
Life.
Life. Exactly. And visually, the teat, with its arms curving downwards, looks even more like a tied piece of cloth than the later, more stylized Ankh.
Okay, that knot idea seems pretty strong then. So the Ankh as a knot. What's the significance of that interpretation?
The article suggests thinking of it as a cosmic knot. A knot that links or ties together the physical world and the spiritual dimension.
Tying things together.
And this immediately brings to mind a really important concept in Hinduism, the Hridaya Granthi.
Hridaya Granthi. Heart knot.
Or knot of life.
Both translations are used. It's seen as the knot within the heart, symbolically speaking, that binds the individual soul, the Atman, to material existence, to the body, to the cycle of samsara.
So the knot that keeps us tied to this world, in a way?
That's the essence of it. It represents the entanglement in the material world, the ego, the attachments that keep the cycle of birth and rebirth going.
Okay, so let's connect these. Ankh loop as a cosmic knot linking physical and spiritual, and the Hindu knot of life binding the soul to the material. Are they saying these are basically the same idea? Not identical in every nuance, of course, given the different contexts, but the symbolic resonance is powerful, isn't it? Both involve a knot that relates the individual or the physical to something larger, something spiritual or cyclical.
Yeah, it really is.
And the article tightens this connection by bringing Om back into the picture. It argues that in Sanatana Dharma, Om and this knot of life are seen as deeply linked. Both relate to the cyclical nature of existence and the underlying divine order.
Okay, let's dive deeper into Om then. You said it's the sound of reality, but unpack that a bit more.
Right. It's more than just a chant. It's considered the primordial vibration, the Shabda Brahman, the sound form of the ultimate reality. The Mandukya Upanishad opens by stating essentially that Om is everything.
Everything.
The past, the present, the future, everything is just Om. And even what's beyond time, that too is Om. It's the seed sound from which the universe unfolds.
That's incredibly profound. The source code of reality, almost.
You can think of it that way. It represents the entire cycle. Creation, srishti, preservation, sthiti, and dissolution, laya. The Rig Veda calls it the immortal word, the essence of all that is sacred.
And it connects to prana, the life force.
Absolutely. It's seen as representing prana, the vital energy that flows through everything, linking everything.
Yeah.
So Om itself embodies that interconnectedness that the knot of life also signifies.
Okay, and this knot of life, the Hridaya Granthi, how is that understood more broadly in Vedic texts?
It's seen as that fundamental binding force. The Atharva Veda has a line that says something like, this knot binds the mortal with the immortal, the seen with the unseen. It's the cosmic tether.
Connecting all opposites, all realms.
Exactly. And on a personal level, it's the knot of the heart, representing our entanglement in samsara, the cycle of karma. Liberation, moksha, is described metaphorically as untying this knot.
So untying the knot is freedom.
That's the goal, releasing oneself from the bonds of ego, karma, and ignorance that the knot represents.
So how do Om and the knot relate directly? How does one affect the other?
Well, Om is seen as the unifying vibration, the underlying reality that the knot is sort of superimposed upon, By meditating on Om, by chanting it, the idea is you align yourself with that fundamental vibration.
Then that helps.
It helps to loosen the knot, to gain awareness of the attachments and limitations represented by the Hridaya Granthi. The Bhagavad Gita hints at this.
What does it say?
Something along the lines of, he who utters Om and remembers me the divine, attains the supreme state after leaving the body. It positions Om as a key to liberation, to moving beyond the confines of the knot.
So chanting Om isn't just symbolic, it's considered an active practice for untying this knot.
Yes. The Katha Upanishad is even more direct. When all the knots that bind the heart are unloosened, then a mortal becomes immortal. This is the teaching. It links dissolving the knot, often through practices involving Om and self-knowledge, directly to achieving immortality or liberation.
And you mentioned Granthis earlier.
Yeah.
Plural.
Yes. In yogic physiology, there's talk of three main granthis or knots in the subtle energy system. The Brahma Granthi, Vishnu Granthi, and Rudra Granthi. These represent different kinds of psychospiritual blockages.
And Om helps with those too.
The belief is that the vibration of Om helps to penetrate and release these energetic knots, allowing spiritual energy, kundalini, to rise more freely, leading towards enlightenment.
Okay, wow. So bringing it back to the Ankh again, with this understanding of and the knot of life, what are the main shared themes the article emphasizes? Let's recap.
Okay, first, the big one. Life and immortality. The Ankh is the key to eternal life in Egypt, and moksha, or liberation into an immortal state, in Hinduism. Different paths, similar ultimate concerns.
Right.
Second, union of opposites. The Ankh potentially symbolizing male-female union, mirroring the Shiva-Shakti dynamic, the creative force in Hinduism.
Got it. And third,
Divine connection. The Ankh, being held by God, signifying divine power, resonates with the idea that the knot of life is tied to the divine order and can be untied through spiritual practice and divine realization.
these parallels are genuinely striking when you lay them out like that. The article also briefly mentioned possible biblical links.
Just touches on them. It notes the tree of life in Genesis as another powerful symbol of eternal life and wisdom, offering a kind of third point of comparison.
A universal theme, maybe?
Possibly. And it mentions the binding and loosing idea from the New Testament, suggesting a metaphorical link to this concept of knots connecting or separating realms. Less direct, perhaps, but interesting food for thought.
And the article circles back to specific texts to support these comparisons, right?
Yes, it does that comparative thing again. It links the Ankh as chronolife force back to the Rig Veda.
Okay.
It connects the Ankh's union of opposites idea to Upanishadic descriptions of Purusha, consciousness, and Prakriti, matter. And it ties the Ankh's immortality theme to Upanishadic statements about the eternal soul, just reinforcing those connections with textual references.
And the theories about how these connections came to be, did it elaborate more?
It mostly reiterates the two main ideas. One, actual ancient cultural exchange, specifically mentioning the Indus Valley link again, and citing scholar Subhash Kak's work suggesting symbolic overlaps, though noting more research is needed.
Right, the historical possibility.
And two, the idea of universal archetypes, that the knot of life, like the Vedic Hridaya Granthi, might just be a fundamental human concept that emerges symbolically in different cultures, maybe including the Ankh.
So direct influence or shared human consciousness, basically.
Those seem to be the main contenders presented.
Okay, and just to wrap up the source references, what were the key texts mentioned overall for interpretation?
It pointed to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, obviously, for the Ankh, meaning life, and being held by gods, maybe parallel to wish-granting trees or ambrosia in India.
Right.
The Atharva Veda, for the idea of breaking knots for liberation, seeing an analogy with the Ankh unlocking eternity. The Bhagavad Gita for the soul's eternal nature, aligning with the Ankh's promise, and Genesis again with the Tree of Life resonating with both traditions.
Got it. So, a real tapestry of connections drawn from various sources. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Traveled from the Nile to the Ganges, symbolically speaking, all through this one fascinating symbol, the Ankh. What are the main things you hope listeners take away from this whole deep dive?
I think the most compelling takeaways are those recurring symbolic threads. The deep concern with life, its continuation, immortality,
Yeah, it seems universal.
the idea of a fundamental life force,
Hmm.
whether we call it prana or see it embodied in the Ankh. And this really intriguing concept of a knot of life, something that binds us but might also hold the key to our freedom.
That knot idea is quite powerful.
It really is. It speaks to entanglement but also potential release.
And for you listening, hopefully this exploration sparked some connections in your own mind. That feeling of, wow, these ancient people, continents apart, were wrestling with the same huge questions about existence, about the divine.
Exactly. Whether the historical links are definitive or not is almost secondary to recognizing these shared symbolic concerns. It tells us something about fundamental human spirituality, doesn't it?
It really does, those aha moments when you see the same pattern emerge.
And like the article concludes, maybe we shouldn't see this as finding final answers. Maybe it's more about appreciating the mystic nature of these symbols and recognizing that deep universal human drive to understand life, death, and what might lie beyond.
So a final thought to leave people with.
Maybe just this. Consider these symbols the Ankh, Om, the knot, not just as ancient artifacts, but as living ideas.
Yeah.
What does the concept of a knot binding you to certain patterns mean in your life? And what might represent the key or the vibration to untie it? Thinking about that interconnectedness, it might reveal more than we expect.